John Anderson had it all. The young CEO at years old was a symbol of success, powerful, wealthy, and on the verge of announcing a career-defining merger. His life was flawless, a beautiful fiancée, an adoring family, and a future that seemed set in stone. But one unexpected moment would change everything, shattering the perfect world he'd built. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. John Anderson was the embodiment of success. At EI, he had achieved what most could only dream of: wealth, power, a thriving empire, and a beautiful fiancée. His life was a carefully constructed facade of perfection. A high-rise office in Manhattan, sleek boardrooms, and an impeccable reputation were all part of his world. Today, he stood on the verge of announcing the biggest merger of his career, an event that would solidify his place at the pinnacle of corporate power. His future seemed set in stone, but then came the unthinkable. The morning started like any other. John was in the midst of reviewing some final details before the press conference when his assistant ushered in an unexpected visitor. A woman, humble in appearance, with tired eyes that spoke of years of struggle, stood in the doorway, holding the hand of a young girl. "Mr. Anderson?" the woman asked, her voice soft but firm. "I'm Maria Delgado. I'm here for the interview you scheduled for a position in your company." John didn't even look up at first, his mind preoccupied with the upcoming press release. But then, the girl, no older than 6, broke away from her mother's grasp. She took a few steps forward, her small legs hurried and unsure before she stopped, gazing up at John with wide, trusting eyes. Without any warning, she called out, "Daddy!" The room seemed to freeze in an instant. John's heart stopped, his breath caught in his throat as his gaze fixed on the child. A tidal wave of emotions flooded him: confusion, disbelief, panic. The girl, with her innocent face, had just called him Daddy. There was no mistake. He could feel the weight of her gaze pressing into him, a truth that he wasn't ready for, that he never saw coming. The woman, Maria, stepped forward cautiously. Her voice was shaky but resolute. "Her name is Sophia, and she's yours, John. She's your daughter." John staggered back as if struck. His mind raced, but the room spun in confusion. The words didn't fit. They didn't make sense. "What are you talking about?" His voice was barely a whisper, the foundation of his perfect world cracking beneath him. Maria's face hardened with pain as she looked at him. "I never meant for this to come out like this. I wanted to protect her, protect us both. But she's yours, John. She's been yours all this time." His mind was reeling. How could this be possible? He'd never known. He'd never even had a hint. For a moment, he could barely hear her words over the pounding in his chest. His eyes flicked from Maria to Sophia, and then back again. Sophia stared up at him, waiting, hopeful, her small hands clutching the hem of her mother's coat. There was no malice in her eyes, only an innocent trust, one that demanded an answer. John's world, the one he'd so carefully built, began to unravel. He had no idea what to do, what to say. How could this happen? How could he not know? The silence in the room stretched, the distant hum of the office, the whir of the air conditioning, the clatter of keyboards in the next room. It all felt so insignificant now. His empire, the fusion of his career, the money and power, it all seemed so distant compared to the small, fragile girl who had just shattered the perfect world he'd created. "John, please," Maria continued, her voice quieter now, yet more firm. "I'm not asking for anything from you. I just need you to acknowledge her. She deserves that." He took a shaky step back, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Denial, fear, a deep, gnawing guilt. Before he could respond, his assistant cleared her throat from the doorway. The press was waiting for him, for the announcement that could make or break everything. But how could he focus on that now? How could he step into the limelight knowing that his entire life was on the verge of falling apart? In that moment, John realized he was standing at the precipice of something far beyond business or success. The world he had worked so hard to build was crumbling, and he didn't even know how to begin putting the pieces back together. The news spread like wildfire. The moment John Anderson's name was linked to the mysterious child, every media outlet in the city seemed to erupt. Headlines screamed accusations, speculations, and crude judgments. No one knew the full story yet, but that didn't stop the gossip machine from churning out rumors. John, still reeling from the shock of the revelation, was holed up in his office, trying to make sense of it all. He hadn't told anyone yet, not Madison, his fiancée, not his parents, and certainly not his colleagues. His mind was a swirling mess of fear and disbelief. How had this happened? Why hadn't he known about Sophia before? The thought of a child, his child, living a life without him, without his knowledge, was unbearable. Maria had left his office after their brief, cryptic exchange. She had promised to keep the details between them, but the press didn't respect her wishes. Within hours, photographs of Sophia and Maria were plastered across newspapers, with John's face next to them, splashed under headlines reading, "CEO's Secret Child" and "Love Child of the Empire." His phone rang incessantly. His assistant's voice cracked through the line. "John, the press is outside. The story's already on TV, and they're asking for a statement. They're calling it a scandal." "People are talking." John sat back in his chair, staring at the phone. His pulse hammered in his ears. How could he explain this? What could he say? The truth was too complicated, too messy, and no matter how much he wanted to deny it, the girl in his office, the one who had called him daddy, was undeniably his daughter. He had no choice now but to face the fallout. He ran his hands over his face and let out a slow, frustrated breath. This wasn't the plan. His life had always been about control. Control of his empire, control over how he was perceived. The idea that he had a child, especially one he knew nothing about, was not part of the narrative he'd built. But the reality was undeniable. Maria had left a message for him, asking him to meet her at a nearby cafe. "We need to talk," it said. His first instinct was to ignore it, to let the storm pass. But something tugged at him, something deeper than his fear of facing the consequences. Against his better judgment, John agreed to meet her. When he arrived at the cafe, Maria was already sitting at a small table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. She looked tired, her face etched with worry and determination. She didn't look like a woman trying to cause trouble. She looked like a mother trying to protect her child. "John," she greeted him softly. "Thanks for coming." He sat down, his gaze flicking nervously toward the window, half expecting the paparazzi to be lurking outside. "What do you want from me, Maria?" His voice was harsh, a defense mechanism to shield himself from the gravity of the situation. Maria didn't flinch at his tone. "I'm not asking for anything from you, John. I never wanted this to come out like this. But Sophia deserves to know who her father is. She deserves more than a life of secrets." John's jaw tightened. "I don't even know her. How could I be a father to someone I don't know?" Maria's eyes darkened, the vulnerability in them giving way to quiet strength. "I didn't want to burden you, John, but I couldn't raise her alone anymore. I've been protecting her all these years, keeping her from a world that could tear her apart. But now the world knows, and I don't want her to grow up thinking that you never cared." John clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. "I didn't know," he muttered, the guilt settling deep in his chest. Maria let out a small sigh, her expression softening. "I know, but it doesn't change the fact that she's your daughter, and she deserves more than a half-truth." John looked away, the weight of her words crashing into him. A part of him felt anger. Anger at Maria for keeping this from him. Anger at the situation, at the mess he'd found himself in. But a larger part of him, something he hadn't expected, felt guilt. Deep, unrelenting guilt for the years he had missed. "I'm not ready for this," he admitted, his voice raw. "I don't even know where to start." Maria nodded, understanding. "You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest with her. She deserves that." As John walked away from the cafe, his mind was a storm. He had no answers, no clear path forward. But one thing was certain. His life had just been changed forever. The media frenzy only grew worse. Sophia's name was everywhere, plastered across the headlines as the daughter of a powerful CEO, the secret love child of John Anderson. The press dug into every corner of his past, looking for anything that could scandalize his image. He couldn't escape it. No matter how much he tried to distance himself from the story, the reality of Sophia and Maria wouldn't go away. The truth was out, and it was only a matter of time before John had to face the consequences. But for now, he couldn't escape the growing need to understand his daughter, who she was, what she needed, and how he could possibly make up for the years he'd lost. As the days passed, John found himself looking for Sophia in every crowd, waiting for a chance to meet her again, to take responsibility for a life that, until recently, had been nothing more than a distant, untouchable thought. The story had only just begun. The weight of the scandal was beginning to suffocate John. Every time he opened his email, another headline greeted him. CEO's hidden daughter scandalizes empire. John Anderson's secret past comes to light. Powerful CEO now faces public backlash over love child. His name was no longer associated with the triumphs of his business, his vision, or the big merger he'd been preparing for. Now he was a mere footnote in a tabloid story about a woman from his past and a child he never knew existed. He hadn't heard from Maria since their meeting at the cafe. His mind was consumed with the barrage of press inquiries, family calls, and his fiancée, Madison, who had remained silent since the bombshell. Every time he tried to reach her, the messages went unanswered. It was clear that Madison was as devastated by the news as everyone else. At home, things were no better. John walked into the grand, almost sterile apartment he shared with Madison. The soft lighting and expensive furniture seemed almost too perfect in the face of the storm brewing outside. Madison sat on the couch, her arms crossed, eyes cold and distant. Her once warm smile was gone, replaced with an expression of betrayal that John couldn't escape. "Madison," he started, his voice faltering, unsure of how to even begin. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on something far beyond him, her fingers tapping nervously on her phone. "How long were you going to keep this from me?" "John?" Her voice was icy, controlled, but there was a rawness underneath it that John couldn't ignore. "I didn't know," he whispered. He wanted to explain, to tell her that this wasn't part of his plan, that he hadn't known about Sophia until just days ago, but he knew it wasn't enough. The damage was already done. "You didn't know?" she repeated, her voice rising now, the hurt clear. "You didn't know? And yet, here we are. You're telling me that you have a daughter you've never told me about?" Her eyes finally met his, and they were filled with a mixture of anger and confusion. "What is this?" "John, how long were you going to keep this a secret?" John opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He couldn't explain the whirlwind of emotions, the guilt, the shock of everything that had happened. He couldn't explain why Maria had kept Sophia from him, why he hadn't known about her, why the universe had forced this moment into his life. "It was a mistake, Madison," he finally managed. "I never knew about her. I'm just trying to figure this out. I didn't expect any of this, but I need you to understand." "No," Madison interrupted, standing up suddenly, her face flushed with emotion. "I don't think you get it. You don't get it. I'm not some naive girl who can just sit here and pretend everything's okay." She shook her head, as if trying to rid herself of the absurdity of it all. "You've lied to me, John. All this time, you've built this perfect life for us, and now I find out that I've been living in a fantasy, a lie." John's stomach churned. The woman he loved, the one he'd planned to marry, was looking at him with disgust. He could see the walls going up between them, the irrevocable distance that would never be the same. He had no defense against the anger and hurt in her eyes. He'd failed her in a way he couldn't fix. "Madison, please," he pleaded. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. I never knew about Sophia. I swear to you, Maria never told me." He ran a hand through his hair, feeling lost. "I can't change what happened, but I'm trying to do the right thing now. For Sophia. For me." Madison scoffed bitterly. "The right thing," she repeated. "You're telling me you want to be a father to a child you've never even met, while I'm supposed to stand by and be the supportive fiancé? I don't think I can do that, John. I don't think I can look at you the same way anymore." John was silent for a long moment. He knew she was right. There was no easy way out, no apology that would fix the gaping hole he had created between them. His heart ached with the knowledge that this might be the end for them. Madison picked up her purse, her movements sharp and deliberate. "I can't be part of this, John. I need time. I need space." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You'll have to figure out your own mess from here on out." Then she was gone. John stood there, frozen, the weight of her words settling over him like a dark cloud. He had lost Madison, the woman he thought he would spend his life with. And for what? A child he never knew about? But as the minutes stretched on, another thought settled in his mind. Sophia, the little girl, his daughter. He had no idea how to be a father, but now, more than ever, he knew he couldn't walk away. Despite the chaos that was tearing apart his life, he was her father, and that meant something. Later that evening, John found himself sitting alone in the penthouse, staring out over the city. His empire, the wealth, the success, everything seemed meaningless now. Nothing compared to the realization that he had a child out there who had been waiting for him, a child he had abandoned without even knowing it. The battle was far from over. His career, his family, everything was at risk, but he couldn't let Sophia slip away from him again. He had to face his mistakes, face the consequences, and face her. John's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was Maria's number. He took a deep breath before answering. "Maria," he said, his voice steady, though his insides churned. "We need to talk." But as he pressed the phone to his ear, he knew that this conversation, this confrontation, was only the beginning of a much bigger fight. A fight to reclaim what he had lost, to rebuild his life, and to prove to Sophia, to Maria, and to himself that he was worthy of being called a father. The hardest part was yet to come. The storm was far from over, and John felt himself sinking deeper into a battle he never expected to fight. The media onslaught continued, and his life outside the office had become a war zone. Every movement, every decision was scrutinized. His phone rang nonstop with demands for interviews, apologies, and statements. The buzz of notifications, the flashing images of his face splashed across every outlet, made it impossible to think clearly. Every day felt like he was suffocating in the weight of a reputation he'd built and was now watching crumble. But it wasn't just the press. At home, things were no better. Madison had left, just as she said she would. John had not heard from her since she walked out, and the silence was deafening. His life with her, a carefully constructed vision of the future, felt like it belonged to another man entirely. His heart ached at the thought of her moving on, her anger and hurt too big to be healed by his apologies. He didn't know if he could ever make things right with her, and honestly, he wasn't sure where to begin. The press conference announcing the merger, once something he eagerly anticipated, now seemed insignificant. His mind kept drifting back to Sophia, the little girl who had shattered his world. She was out there, living a life he hadn't been a part of, and the truth of her existence was slowly tearing him apart. The phone buzzed again. Maria's name flashed on the screen. John took a deep breath before answering. He had avoided her calls after their initial meeting. He didn't feel ready to face her again, but he knew he had no choice. If he was going to make any attempt to repair the mess he was in, he had to speak to her. "Maria," he said quietly. "John," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We need to talk about Sophia." He closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing heavily on him. The need to step up as a father, to protect Sophia from the fallout, was overwhelming. But the more he tried to think through it all, the more he realized how lost he felt. Could he be a father after all this time? Could he ever make up for the years he'd missed? "I know," he said, his voice a little broken. "I've been trying to process everything. I don't even know where to start. This is all happening too fast." Maria let out a deep sigh. "I understand. I do. But Sophia, she's confused. She's asking questions, John. She's wondering why you haven't come to see her. Why she doesn't have a father like all the other kids. And I can't keep lying to her. I never wanted to drag you into this mess, but now it's out in the open, and there's no turning back." John stood by the window, looking out over the city. It was a view he'd seen 1,000 times before, but now it felt cold and distant. His world was no longer the one he controlled. It was spiraling beyond his grasp. "I'm not ready for this," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I've been so focused on my career. I didn't know how to handle this. I don't know how to be a father, Maria." Maria's voice softened. "You don't have to be perfect, John. You just have to show up. Sophia needs you to be there. She needs to know you care." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. Could he be that man? Could he give up everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed, just to show up for a little girl he barely knew? "I want to be there for her," he said quietly, the sincerity in his voice surprising even himself. "But I don't know where to start. I don't know if she'll even want me." "She already does, John," Maria said gently. "You don't have to fix everything right away. Just take it one step at a time." The conversation hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, John felt something other than the crushing weight of his own failure. There was a flicker of hope, a small ember that hadn't been there before. Could he rebuild? Could he be the father Sophia needed? "I'll meet her," John said, his voice firming up. "I'll come to see her." Maria's relief was palpable over the phone. "Thank you, John. I know it's not easy, but she deserves to know that you care. You can do this." The next day, John drove to the address Maria had given him. It was a small, modest house on the outskirts of the city, nothing like the sprawling mansions he was used to. As he stood outside, staring at the simple structure, he was struck by the overwhelming sense of inadequacy. How could he, a man who had everything, possibly be enough for a little girl who had lived without him for so long? Maria opened the door when he knocked. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside to let him in. Sophia was in the living room, sitting on the floor, her back turned to him. She was playing with a set of colorful blocks, unaware of his presence. John stood in the doorway for a moment, his heart pounding. He had no idea how to approach her. Maria gave him a gentle nudge forward. "She's waiting for you." John took a deep breath, his steps heavy as he walked into the room. Sophia looked up, her big brown eyes meeting his. There was a moment of silence as they just stared at each other. She seemed so small, so innocent, but there was something in her gaze that told him she knew more than she should. "Hi, Sophia," John said, his voice soft, unsure. Sophia didn't say anything at first. She simply studied him, as if trying to place him. Then quietly, she said, "Are you my daddy?" The words cut through him like a knife. His heart twisted. He hadn't been there for her when she needed him the most. And now, here she was, asking for the one thing he had failed to give her. John sank to his knees, looking at her. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," he whispered, the guilt overwhelming him. "I should have been here. I should have known. But I'm here now. I want to be your daddy." Sophia didn't answer. Instead, she put down her blocks and crawled toward him. Without a word, she wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. John closed his eyes, letting the tears fall. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild the life he had nearly lost. The battle for redemption was just beginning, but now he had something worth fighting for. John had spent the last few days in a daze, trying to wrap his mind around everything that had happened. The media frenzy had only gotten worse since his meeting with Sophia. Every move he made was under a microscope, scrutinized by the world that had once adored him. But nothing compared to the feeling of holding Sophia in his arms for the first time. Nothing compared to the weight of the reality that had suddenly become his life. His world had been turned upside down. The empire he'd built, the reputation he'd carefully crafted, it all seemed so small compared to the little girl he barely knew. And yet, in those few quiet moments together, he felt a connection, a bond he hadn't expected. She needed him. She deserved him. And for the first time in years, John was starting to understand the true meaning of responsibility. Maria had insisted on keeping the visit brief, and John respected her wishes. He didn't want to overwhelm Sophia. The child had already been through so much, and John's presence, though well-intentioned, was a huge change for her. But even in those few minutes, he'd seen something in Sophia's eyes. A deep yearning for connection, for a father who could fill the empty space that had been left in her life. After their first meeting, John had continued to visit, each time a little longer, a little more confident. Sophia was still shy around him, and John couldn't blame her. How could a 6-year-old trust a man who had been absent for her entire life? But each time she warmed up to him more. Slowly they started to build something, however fragile. Maria, on the other hand, remained distant. She was polite, but there was an unspoken tension between them. John couldn't blame her for it. He had no right to expect anything more than what she was willing to give. She had spent years protecting Sophia, raising her alone, and now here he was, trying to waltz into their lives and play the role of a father. But the more John thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about his daughter. This was about redemption, about fixing the things he had broken. It wasn't going to be easy, and he knew there would be bumps along the way, but he was determined to try. One evening, after another long day of facing the press and managing the wreckage of his business, John found himself standing in front of the mirror in his penthouse. His reflection seemed foreign to him. Gone was the confident, poised CEO who commanded boardrooms and dictated terms. In his place stood a man who was lost, a man who had lost control of everything he thought he understood. And yet, there was something else there, something new, an acceptance of his own imperfections. An understanding that being a father was not about perfection, but about being present. The phone buzzed on the counter, pulling him out of his reverie. It was Maria. He had been expecting this call. "John," her voice was calm but tight. "We need to talk. About Sophia." His heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change, when they would have to face the uncomfortable truth that they could never go back to the way things were before. "I'll be there," he said quickly, hanging up before his nerves could get the better of him. The drive to Maria's house felt long, each second stretched thin with anxiety. When he arrived, he found Maria standing at the door, her face a mask of composure, but John could see the unease in her eyes. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. The living room was quiet. Sophia was in the other room, probably playing or reading, but John could feel her presence lingering in the air, like an invisible thread connecting him to everything he was trying to understand. "Sit down, John," Maria said, gesturing to the couch. She took a seat across from him, folding her arms tightly across her chest. John sat down, but the silence between them was thick, charged. He didn't know what to say. He had spent so much time thinking about how to fix things with Sophia, but now the weight of Maria's gaze made him realize that the road to redemption wasn't just about Sophia. It was about Maria, too. He owed her just as much as he owed his daughter. "I've been thinking a lot about all this," John began, his voice low. "About Sophia, about what I've missed. And I know I can't change the past. I can't fix the years that I wasn't there for her. But I'm here now, Maria, and I'm not going anywhere." Maria didn't respond right away. She just stared at him, as if weighing his words. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "You can't just expect everything to go back to normal," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "I've raised Sophia on my own for all these years, John, and now you're suddenly here, trying to be a part of her life. I don't know if that's something I can just hand over." John's chest tightened. "I'm not asking you to hand her over, Maria. I'm not trying to take her away from you. I want to be there for her. I want to be a father to her. And I know I've made a mess of things, but I'm trying to make it right." She sighed, looking down at her hands for a moment before meeting his gaze again. "I never asked for this," she said quietly. "I didn't want Sophia's life to be part of some scandal. I didn't want her to grow up in a world where everyone is talking about her father like some kind of trophy or scandalous secret. I wanted her to have a chance at a normal life, a quiet life." "I didn't want this either," John replied, his voice filled with regret. "But it's happened, and now I have to be the man she needs. I have to be the father I never was. I don't expect you to trust me right away, Maria. I just want you to know that I'm willing to fight for this, for both of you." Maria's expression softened just a little, though her eyes were still guarded. "I know you're trying, John, and maybe that's enough for now. But don't expect it to be easy, and don't expect Sophia to just forgive you overnight. This is going to take time, a lot of time." "I'm willing to wait," John said, his voice full of determination. "I've already wasted too many years. I'll do whatever it takes." Maria looked at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I'll hold you to that." As John left Maria's house that night, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a promise of easy answers or immediate success, but it was a start. He had a long way to go before he could truly become the father Sophia needed, and a long road ahead to rebuild his relationship with Maria. But for the first time since this entire nightmare began, John felt like maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. The next step would be harder than anything he'd ever faced, but it was a step he had to take, and he would. The days blurred together for John, each one another agonizing step forward, no matter how small. He spent hours in the office, attempting to keep his empire from collapsing under the weight of the scandal, but his mind was never fully on the job. His thoughts constantly drifted back to Sophia, to Maria, and the fragile, uncertain bond he was trying to build with both of them. The media never let up, their invasive questions and relentless coverage only making everything harder. Every move he made was under a microscope, and every failure felt like it was magnified 1,000 times. But even as the storm of his professional life continued to rage, John couldn't ignore the small victories, the moments of connection he began to share with Sophia. The first time she smiled at him, not the shy, guarded smile of a child unsure of who this stranger was, but a genuine, open expression that spoke of trust. The way she began to call him Daddy more often, not out of obligation, but because she was starting to understand what it meant. Those moments, fleeting as they were, made all the pain and humiliation feel like it was worth it. Still, the reality of his fractured relationship with Maria hung over him. She had been clear with him. He needed to prove himself, not just to her, but to Sophia, and John understood that. He knew he couldn't expect forgiveness just because he was trying to do the right thing. His failures, his absence in Sophia's life, couldn't be erased by a few days of showing up and trying to be a father. Maria had made that clear. There were no shortcuts. The tension between them had grown more palpable each day, their interactions becoming increasingly strained. Maria didn't hate him, but she didn't trust him either. John's sincerity, no matter how deeply it ran, couldn't heal the wounds he had caused by being absent all those years. Maria had raised Sophia alone, protecting her from the world and keeping her safe, and John could see how fiercely she guarded her daughter. He had to respect that. He had to prove that he wasn't just another disappointment in their lives. That night, after another long day of managing crisis meetings at work and dealing with constant press, John found himself standing in front of Maria's house once again. This time, however, he wasn't just showing up because he felt like it was the right thing to do. He had made a decision. It was time to stop pretending that he could balance both worlds, the one he had built and the one that was now waiting for him. When Maria opened the door, her eyes immediately hardened, though there was no anger there. It was more like weariness, as though she was simply tired of waiting for the man she once thought was capable of greatness to prove he could live up to that potential. "John," she said quietly, stepping aside to let him in. There was no warmth in her voice, but there was no coldness either. It was as if they were two people who had shared a history, but now stood at a crossroads, unsure of how to move forward. "I need to talk to you," John said, his voice low but firm. "About Sophia." Maria's eyes narrowed, but she nodded, gesturing toward the living room. She's in bed. You won't be seeing her tonight. John couldn't help the pang of regret that struck him. He had hoped to spend some time with Sophia, but he understood. She needed space too. He sat on the couch, his body tense as he waited for Maria to speak. When she finally sat across from him, her posture rigid, he felt the weight of everything between them. He was here to fight for something that felt like it might slip through his fingers if he wasn't careful. He couldn't afford to lose this. Not again. I'm listening, Maria said, folding her arms across her chest, her eyes unwavering. John took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I know I've made a mess of things. I can't change the past, and I know I've failed both of you, but I want to try. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right away, Maria. I'm not asking for anything from you that I haven't earned, but I am asking you to give me a chance to prove that I'm not the man I was, that I can be a father to Sophia, that I can be someone you can trust. Maria remained silent, her gaze steady. It was clear that she was processing every word, every breath John took. She wasn't ready to let him in completely, but there was something in her expression that told him she was considering it, just a little. Maybe, if he worked hard enough, he could earn the smallest piece of that trust. You can't expect Sophia to forgive you overnight, Maria said after a long pause, her voice quiet but firm. She's a little girl, John, and she's been through a lot. She might be willing to give you a chance, but it's going to take time. It's going to take patience, and you'll have to prove that you're not just some man who shows up when it's convenient. You have to be there for her, for both of us, in the long run. I know, John said, his voice tight with emotion, and I will. I'll do whatever it takes. Maria's eyes softened for a moment, and John could see the exhaustion in them. He knew she had been through so much more than he could ever understand. The years of raising Sophia on her own, of protecting her from the world, of doing everything she could to give her daughter a future, without the shadow of his absence hanging over them. I don't expect you to trust me right away, John continued, but I need you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. There was a long silence, a space where neither of them knew what would happen next. Finally, Maria spoke. All right, she said, her voice softer now. You can start by being a father to her. No more excuses. No more pretending you can fix everything overnight. But if you're serious, if you want to prove yourself, then you'll have to show up every day, and not just for the good moments. You'll have to be there for the hard ones too. John nodded, the words settling deep in his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time since this all began, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. I will, he said, his voice steady with resolve. I won't let you or Sophia down. As John left that night, a small weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. The road ahead was still long, and the challenges would only get harder from here. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction, and that was enough to keep going. The days passed in a blur, and John found himself sinking deeper into the new reality of his life. The pressure was relentless. His empire was still teetering on the edge, his reputation under constant attack, but his focus had shifted. Sophia, his daughter, was now at the center of his thoughts. Every minute spent with her, every moment he could carve out of his shattered life, became more precious than any business deal or press conference. He was learning how to be a father, but it was not easy. It would never be easy. Maria had given him a chance, but that trust was fragile, and she was watching him closely. He couldn't blame her for that. After all, she had been Sophia's rock, her only parent for so long. The scar on her heart from years of doing it alone was something John would never fully understand. Still, he was determined to prove to her, and to himself, that he was worthy of being part of their lives. John spent more time at Maria's house, sitting with Sophia while she played, trying to engage with her, trying to build that connection. The awkwardness was undeniable, especially in the beginning. Sophia would often look at him with wary eyes, as if unsure whether this strange man really was her father, or just another visitor in her life. But there were moments, brief but meaningful, when she would laugh, when her eyes would light up, and John felt like he was making progress. One afternoon, as he sat on the floor with Sophia, building a tower out of blocks, he caught a glimpse of Maria in the kitchen. She was watching them, her expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and for the briefest of seconds, there was something there, something unspoken, a hint of trust perhaps, or maybe it was just exhaustion. Either way, John took it as a sign that, little by little, he was moving in the right direction. "Daddy, look!" Sophia's voice broke through his thoughts, and John turned his attention back to her. She was holding up her creation, a wobbly tower of blocks, and grinning at him. John smiled back, his heart swelling in his chest. That's amazing, Sophia. You're really good at this. Sophia's grin grew even wider, and for a moment, the weight of everything else, his career, the scandal, his fractured relationship with Maria, disappeared. It was just him and her, and that was all that mattered in that moment. But that feeling was fleeting, and the harsh reality of his situation came rushing back. Maria hadn't changed her stance. She was still cautious, still hesitant to let him fully into their lives. She was letting him spend time with Sophia, but it was clear that she wasn't going to hand over her daughter without a fight. And John knew that was fair. He had no right to expect anything else. One evening, after another quiet night spent with Sophia, Maria pulled him aside in the kitchen. Her face was hard, her voice low and firm. "We need to talk," she said, and John felt the familiar knot of anxiety twist in his stomach. "About what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but there was no hiding the tension in his chest. "About Sophia," Maria said. "I see what you're doing, John. I see how hard you're trying, but I need you to understand something. You're not just here for the good moments, for the fun playtime. You can't just show up and expect her to love you because you're her father. You're going to have to do the hard stuff too, the things that come with being a parent, the discipline, the tough decisions, the responsibility. You can't just dip in and out of her life when it's convenient for you. It doesn't work that way." John swallowed, the weight of her words hitting him harder than he expected. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not here for just the fun moments. I'm here for all of it. I want to be her father, and I know I've missed so much, but I'm ready to step up, for both of you." Maria looked at him for a long moment, her eyes piercing, before she nodded. "I'm not asking for miracles, John. I'm not asking you to fix everything overnight, but you need to prove that you're in this for the long haul, and that's going to take time." John nodded. He knew she was right. He couldn't expect anything to be easy. He couldn't expect Maria to suddenly welcome him with open arms, or for Sophia to instantly accept him as her father. This was going to take time, more time than he had ever expected. "I understand," he said. "I'm not giving up. I'm in this, and I'll prove it." Maria's gaze softened, just slightly. "I hope so, John, for your sake, and for Sophia's." That night, as he lay in bed, John thought about what Maria had said. The hard stuff. He had always been so focused on his career, on building an empire, that he hadn't understood what it really meant to be a father. The easy moments, the smiles, the laughter, the affection, those were the easy parts. The hard parts were the ones that came with real responsibility. The discipline, the tough decisions, the moments when it wasn't fun to be a parent, when being there for your child meant making the hard calls, the uncomfortable ones. It wasn't just about showing up when it was convenient. It was about being present, even when it wasn't easy. And John knew that for the first time in his life, he was ready to face those challenges. The next day, he woke up early, ready to make a difference. He spent the entire morning with Sophia, teaching her how to ride her bike, taking her to the park. The joy on her face as she pedaled around, laughing and calling out to him, made everything else fade into the background. He was finally getting a glimpse of the father he could be, but it wasn't enough. He still had to prove himself to Maria, still had to prove that he was committed to this, to them. And that, John realized, was going to be the hardest part of all. But he was ready, for Sophia, for Maria, for the life he wanted to rebuild. He would face it all, no matter what. The morning air was heavy with anticipation as John stood outside the courthouse, the sound of traffic rushing by, muffled in his ears. Today, everything would change. Today would determine if his place in Sophia's life would be permanent or fleeting. His heart pounded in his chest, the familiar weight of fear mixing with a deep, unshakable resolve. He had fought so hard for this moment, to prove to Maria, to Sophia, and most importantly to himself, that he could be the father he'd failed to be all those years ago. He had thought about this day countless times. Every conversation with Maria, every moment with Sophia, had led him to this point. The battle for custody, though never something he had imagined he'd be fighting, was now his reality. And as much as he tried to prepare himself for the outcome, the truth was that he had no idea what would happen today. Maria had kept her distance in the weeks leading up to this day, not out of malice, but out of necessity. She had made it clear to John that this was not just about him proving his worth to her. It was about Sophia. It was about what was best for Sophia, and that wasn't something that could be rushed. John understood that. He had to earn not just Sophia's love and trust, but Maria's as well. As John entered the courthouse, the weight of the moment settled into his bones. He hadn't thought this far ahead. hadn't thought about what would come next after the dust settled. All he knew was that he couldn't lose Sophia again. She was his daughter, no matter the mistakes of his past, no matter the years he had missed. He had learned, slowly but surely, that there was nothing in his life more important than being a father to her. The courtroom was tense. His attorney stood beside him, exchanging brief words with the opposing side. Maria sat across the room, her face a mask of calm, but John could see the tension in her shoulders, in the way her fingers fidgeted in her lap. She had done everything she could to protect Sophia, and John knew that this moment would be as difficult for her as it was for him. John glanced over at her, but she didn't meet his eyes. He couldn't blame her. The last thing she needed was for him to show up as some idealized version of the man he wanted to be. She had spent years raising Sophia alone, and that was not something to be brushed aside. The judge entered, and the room grew quiet. John straightened, his nerves tightening as the proceedings began. The questions were methodical, each one more difficult than the last. His life, his choices, his mistakes, they were all on display for the court to see. And Maria, despite the pain it caused her, didn't hesitate to speak her truth. She deserves stability, Maria said, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed her anxiety. She's had to live through so much uncertainty. I can't risk that for her again. John's throat tightened as he listened to her words. The reality of what he had done, the years he had let slip by, weighed heavily on him. He was asking Maria, asking the court, to believe in the man he was trying to become. His lawyer spoke next, presenting his case. He argued that John had changed, that he was committed to being the father Sophia needed, and that he had the resources and determination to provide a stable home for her. But John knew that this battle wasn't just about what was on paper. It was about trust. It was about time. The moment stretched on, the tension thick in the air. John's heart beat loudly in his chest as he stole another glance at Maria. She was holding it together, but he could see the way her jaw clenched, the way her hands rested tightly in her lap. She wasn't just fighting for Sophia's well-being. She was fighting for everything she had worked for, everything she had done alone. Finally, it was his turn to speak. The room fell silent as he stood, his legs shaking beneath him. He didn't have a prepared speech, no rehearsed lines. All he had were the words that had been building up inside of him for months. "I don't deserve to ask for this," he started, his voice quiet but resolute. "I've made mistakes. I've failed Sophia, and I've failed Maria. I wasn't there for her when she needed me the most, and I can't change that. But I am here now. I am here for Sophia, and I'll be here every day, for the rest of my life." John paused, looking around the room, but his eyes eventually landed on Sophia's empty seat. His heart squeezed in his chest as he thought about the little girl who had changed everything for him. "I may not be the perfect father. I may never be able to fix the years I've lost. But I know this. Sophia deserves a chance at a life where she knows that her father loves her. No matter what, I will fight for that. I will fight for her, every day." The silence in the courtroom was profound. John could feel the weight of every eye on him, but he didn't flinch. This wasn't about his pride, his ego, or his reputation. This was about Sophia. The judge nodded, and the proceedings continued. John didn't know what to expect. He didn't know how long it would take, but he had said everything that mattered. And in that moment, as the judge deliberated, John finally allowed himself to breathe. A few hours later, they were back in the courtroom. The judge's decision came down: shared custody, with Sophia's best interests at the forefront of the arrangement. John's heart nearly stopped as the words registered. The court had granted him the opportunity to be a father, to be a part of Sophia's life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything he wanted, but it was a start. John's eyes met Maria's across the room, and for the first time in a long time he saw something different in her gaze. It wasn't full trust, not yet, but there was something that resembled hope. Maria stood, walking toward him, her expression softening. "You have a lot to prove," she said, her voice low but not unkind. "But you've earned this chance." John nodded, his throat tight. "I won't waste it, Maria. I promise." And in that moment, as he stood there, a father who had fought for his place in his daughter's life, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the faintest spark of redemption. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be more challenges, more hard decisions, and plenty of moments when he would doubt himself. But for the first time, John understood what mattered most: family, love, and the courage to face the hardest parts of life head-on. And he was ready for all of it, because Sophia deserved that, and he would give it to her.